Hello, fourth grade. It's nice to have you back. Jumping right into things, if you remember, last time we were together, we read chapters 5 and 6 in The Sign of the Beaver by Elizabeth George Spear. And chapter 5 and 6 were packed full of adventure. Previously, remember, something had broken into Matt's cabin and we found out it was a bear that took all the food, everything that he had left. His gun had already been stolen. Took the flour, ate the flour, molasses, all that good stuff. So Matt decides to go out. He's out in the forest and he finds a bee tree, a tree that has bees in it. And you know, where there's bees in a little beehive, there's honey. And Matt was like, oh, I want some honey. I need to freshen up my food. And so he climbed up the tree and tried to break off some of the bits to get some honey. And he got into a terrible pickle because if you remember, have you ever been stung by a bee or a wasp? Any of you? And you know, it hurts, doesn't it? He got stung by lots of bees, and that can actually be very dangerous. So to escape the bees, he ran to the water, and in the process of running to the water, his foot got tangled in some roots from a tree. The ground was real muddy and boggy, kind of swampy, and he lost a boot. He hurt his ankle badly. He went into the water to escape the bees because bees don't like water. And then he I think he was losing consciousness, coming in and out of consciousness, and he vaguely remembered being lifted up, and he thought, Pa? You know, did Pa come back? And he comes to realize, do you remember who it was that got him out of the water? Right, it was Sockness who got him out of the water. The Indians had been watching him. Remember, he felt like he was being watched. And he was right, he was being watched. But they took care of him. He was taken back to his cabin. Sockness gave him medicine, checked on him each day, making sure he was okay. Sockness introduced Matt to Sockness's grandson, and his name, Etienne. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. That's the way I would say it, Etienne. So he is introduced to Etienne. Etienne is 14 years old, almost the same age as Matt. They're close in age, and they don't really seem to care too much for each other. Remember, they were kind of like not very friendly to one another. But Matt was so grateful that he was saved, that they were taking care of him. They were bringing him food. They brought him a crutch. Do you remember another thing they brought to Matt that he really needed? Remember how his boot got lost in the boggy mud? They brought him a pair of moccasins, right? Made from animal skin. And he put them on. He was like, daggone, these moccasins are comfy. They felt so much better than the old boots that pinched your toes. So they're really taking good care of him. Now, so chapters 5 and 6, Matt has been just given so many gifts from Sockness, and he said, how can I repay you? And if you remember, he handed the only thing he could think of that he had to give to Sockness, and that was a book, Robinson Crusoe, which Matt loved dearly. It was very special to him. It was his only book and the only thing he knew to give. And Sockness was holding the book, and remember, he was holding it upside down because he couldn't read. I mean, he wasn't brought up as a white person. He had his own Indian language. He didn't know this language. And it turns out that Sockness, in return for having saved Matt, wanted Matt to teach Etienne how to read so that he didn't want his tribe being taken advantage of. And he felt like that's what was happening with the white men coming in, taking advantage of Native American tribes because they could not read. They were trusting the white men, and the white men took advantage of them and took land and different things, which was unfortunate. But Sockness doesn't want that to happen. So he wants he wants Matt to teach Etienne how to read. You know what? I'm gonna have to go grab my glasses. I forgot. And I would try and do it, but I'll try. I'll see how I do. If it gets too bad, I'll go get my glasses. But we're going to read chapters 7 and 8 today, and to see what happens. It's getting exciting, isn't it? There's just so much that happens in every chapter. It's just like, holy cow. But Matt is out in the wilderness all by himself. There's all kinds of crazy things that can go on. All right, chapter 7, I'm on page 32. Get to that page. I'm going to grab my glasses. Sorry. Thanks. Everybody with me? Okay. Y'all are so sweet. And you sat so nicely while I went to get them. Thanks. Okay, chapter 7. Before he had his eyes open next morning, Matt knew that something was wrong with this day. When it came back to him, he sat up with a groan. Ugh, Etienne. What had possessed him to give a book to an Indian? How could he possibly teach a savage to read? Sorry, I forgot to go over these vocab words. We've got heathen. Heathen and savage are kind of similar words, meaning somebody that's not very civilized. If you're called a savage, that's not a very good term. I mean, it just means you're being kind of like, rah! You're not acting like a real calm person, like a proper person. Disdainful means kind of looking at with a look of, come on, what are you doing? Type look, like kind of like a look of scorn. And then we have adz, A-D-Z. Now, I did not know what this was, this word. I had to use my dictionary and look this up. And in my dictionary, the one we have in the classroom, it's spelled A-D-Z-E, but it's a type of tool, kind of like an axe, okay? So adz, they'll bring that up in here. Okay, he tried to think back to the time his mother had taught him his ABCs. He could plainly see that brown-covered primer she held in her hands. He had detested it, meaning he hated it. Ugh. He had to learn the short verses printed beside each letter. A, in Adam's fall, we sinned all. Well, that would hardly do. To be honest, he wasn't sure to this day just what it meant. I don't know what that means either. He would feel mighty silly trying to explain it to a heathen, to somebody that's not his type of person. Then happily, he recalled another book that had been sent to his sister, Sarah, from England, with a small picture to illustrate each letter. No nonsense about Adam. A was for apple. Sarah had been luckier than he, and that's much more obvious. That makes much more sense. A is for apple. But he had no way of making pictures, and there were no apples here in the forest. What could he find for A that an Indian would understand? He looked about the cabin, T for table, though it was unlikely they'd ever get as far as T. How about A for arm? Well, that was simple enough. B. His eye fell on the leg bone of the squirrel left from last night's meal. The stub of a candle would do for C. D. Door would be just the word for Etienne. He certainly could walk out of one fast enough, and would again, no doubt, long before they got to D. So Matt is very skeptical. He doesn't think this is going to work out. He doesn't think Etienne's going to sit still to learn these lessons that he's supposed to teach him. So he's going, yeah, we'll never get to D, but whatever. He doubted that Etienne would come. So he's not even thinking Etienne's going to come this morning. He doesn't even think he'll be there for the first lesson. Still, he had better be ready. He stirred the fire, ate a chunk of the cold Indian corn cake, and set about to prepare a schoolroom. He's kind of being homeschooled like you guys. He shoved the two stools together and laid Robinson Crusoe on the table. He did not have paper or ink. He found a ribbon of birch bark in a corner and tore off a strip and sharpened a stick to a point. Then he waited. Etienne came, swinging a dead rabbit by the ears. He slung it disdainfully on the table, so he just kind of plopped this rabbit on the table. Thank you, Matt said. That's a big one. I won't need anything else for several days. So that sounds kind of gross to us, but Matt's going, cool, that's dinner. That's a good thing. His politeness brought no response. Sit here, he ordered. He hesitated. I never thought as how I'd have to teach anyone to read, but I have figured a way to start. Now, he's a 12-year-old boy. He's not sure how to teach someone how to read, but he's going to try because he feels like he owes it to them. Silently, the boy sat down as straight and rigid as a cedar post. When Matt hunched himself onto the other stool, the boy's scowl deepened. You know, a scowl's a look on your face. Plainly, he did not like having the white boy so close to him. Etienne is not one bit happy to be there. He does not care for this situation. Etienne had no need to be finicky, Matt thought. He smelled none too sweet himself. The grease smeared on his body, even on his hair, stunk up the whole cabin. It was supposed to keep off the mosquitoes, he'd heard, but he thought he'd rather have the pesky insects himself. He drew a letter on the birch bark. Now, let me just pop back to this. So, the Native Americans would wear this grease on their bodies and in their hair, and apparently the smell of it was supposed to keep the mosquitoes away, because you know how pesky mosquitoes can be. And Matt was saying, gosh, it stunk so bad, he'd just soon be bit by mosquitoes. This is the first letter, he explained, A. A for arm. He repeated this several times, pointing to his own arm. Etienne kept to his stubborn, scornful silence. Matt set his jaw. He could be stubborn too, he decided. He opened Robinson Crusoe. We'll pick out the A's on this page, he said, trying to control his impatience. He pointed. Now, you show me one. Etienne stared straight ahead of him in silence. Then, to Matt's astonishment, he grudgingly laid a grubby finger on a letter A. Good, said Matt, copying the word Sockness used so often. Find another. Suddenly, the boy broke his silence. White man's book foolish, he scoffed. Write arm, 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 all over paper. Puzzled at first, Matt saw his own mistake. Hundreds of other words began with A, he explained, or have A in them, and there are 25 more letters. Etienne scowled. How long? He demanded. What do you mean? How long Etienne learned signs and books? So he wants to know, how long is it going to take to teach him how to read? Well, it will take some time, Matt said. There are a lot of long words in this book. 1 moon? Now, what would that mean, 1 moon? 1 day? Do you think he could teach him to read in 1 day? That's what 1 moon would mean. 1 month? Of course not. It might take a year. With one swift jerk of his arm, Etienne knocked the book from the table. Before Matt could speak, he was out of the cabin and gone. Reckon that's the end of the lessons, Matt said to himself. Cheerfully, he began to skin the rabbit. So that didn't last very long, did it? Etienne is so not wanting to be there. He just is really irritated with Matt. He doesn't even know Matt, but he does not like the idea of him teaching him how to read. I think he doesn't like the fact that he's a white boy. He does not care for that. And he's just not being patient with him at all, trying to teach him to read. He's not grateful about it. You know, he's like, how long is this going to take? And Matt's like, well, I don't know. It might be up to a year. Etienne's, forget this. And he stormed out of the cabin. So Matt's going, okay, good. I don't have to worry about him anymore. And he went about skinning the rabbit so that he could eat that for dinner. All right, let's go ahead and turn to chapter 8, page 36. Are y'all okay? Good. All right, chapter 8. By the next morning, he was half sorry the boy would not be coming again. So now, half sorry the boy wouldn't be coming again. They didn't like each other, though. But Matt has nobody out there. Even if it's somebody he didn't really like, at least it was another human person. And he didn't even, you know, didn't have that at all. So even though he didn't really care for Etienne too much, at least it was somebody. He didn't know whether he was annoyed or relieved when Etienne walked through the door without a sign of greeting and sat down at the table. So Etienne just walked into the cabin and sat down at the table. Matt decided to skip B for bone. In the night, he had thought of a better way. This book isn't a treaty, he began. It's a story. Excuse me. It's about a man who gets shipwrecked on a desert island. I'll read some of it out loud to show you. He opened Robinson Crusoe at the first page and began to read. I was born in the year 1632 in the city of York. He stopped. He remembered suddenly how the first time he had tried to read this book, he had found that first page so dull. He had come to close to giving up right there. Have you ever done that? Like you've started reading a book and the first page is just boring and you're like, forget it. Sometimes you have to give a book a couple of chapters to see if you enjoy it. I mean, if you get too far into it and you're like, I cannot stand this book, then it might be time to put it down. But sometimes you need to give a book a little bit of a chance. So he'd better skip the beginning and get on with the story if he wanted to catch Etienne's attention. I'll read the part about the storm at sea, he said. That sounds a little bit more exciting, doesn't it? He had read the book so many times that he knew exactly where to find the right page. Taking a deep breath, as though he were struggling in the water himself, he chose the page where Robinson Crusoe was dashed from the lifeboat and swallowed up in the sea. Now, if you notice, see how the writing changes in your book, goes to italics and it's indented. They're taking a quote from the book Robinson Crusoe. Nothing can describe the confusion of thought which I felt when I sunk into the water, for though I swam very well, yet I could not deliver myself from the waves so as to draw breath. For I saw the sea come after me as high as a great bill, and as furious as as a great hill, and as furious as an enemy. So he's drowning. He cannot get himself out of the water. It's rough. It's a little bit scary there. Matt looked up from the page. There was not a flicker of interest in the boy's face. Had he understood a single word? Discouraged, he laid down the book. What did a storm at sea mean to a savage who had lived all his life in the forest? So he's thinking Etienne probably can't even picture what the sea would look like if he had never seen it, had not seen pictures of it. He's always been in the forest. So to talk about the sea to Etienne, for someone that had never seen it before, they might not really understand it. Well, he said lamely. Now they use the word lamely. It just means, typically the word lame means that you can't walk. But lamely just means that he's kind of like weak and just kind of like, well, okay. It gets better as you go along. Once more, Etienne took him by surprise. White man get out of water? He asked. Ah, so Etienne had been listening. He says, so did the white man get out of the water? Now he's a little bit curious. Oh, yes, Matt said, delighted. Everyone else on the ship is drowned. He gets thrown up all alone on an island. So Robinson Crusoe was the only one that survived on this ship. The Indian nodded. He seemed satisfied. Shall I read more of it? Etienne nodded again. Go now, he said. Come back, Seba. Seba means tomorrow, the Native American word. The next morning, there was no question of beef or bone. Matt had the book open and waiting at the part he wanted to read. So now Matt's a little bit excited too, because Etienne's showing interest in this book that Matt loves so much, and Matt's trying to choose the parts that would interest Etienne. This is about the morning after the storm, he explained. Robinson Crusoe looks out and sees that part of the ship hasn't sunk yet. He swims out and manages to save some things and carry them to shore. He began to read. Once again, it was impossible to tell whether Etienne understood. Presently, Matt slowed down. It was discouraging reading to a wooden post. Now, is he actually reading to a wooden post? No, but that's how he describes Etienne. Etienne's just sitting there, no expression, nothing, no smile, no like, what happens next? Nothing. He said it's like reading to a wooden post. But Etienne spoke at once. White man not smart like Indian, he said scornfully. Indian not need thing from ship. Indian make all thing he need. So he's saying, what the heck? The white man, why does he need to go back to the ship? An Indian wouldn't have to go back to a ship. An Indian would be able to make anything he needed. So he's thinking the white man's kind of stupid for having to go back to the ship. Disappointed and cross, Matt put the book down. They might as well get on with the alphabet. He drew a B on the birch bark. After Etienne had gone, Matt kept thinking about Robinson Crusoe and all the useful things he had managed to salvage from that ship. He found a carpenter's chest, for instance, bags of nails, 2 barrels of bullets, and a dozen hatchets. A dozen! Why, Matt and his father had come up here to Maine with 1 axe and an adze. They had cut down trees and built this whole cabin and the table and the stools without a single nail. Crusoe had found a hammock to sleep in instead of prickly hemlock boughs. He could see now how it must have sounded to Etienne. Come to think of it, Robinson Crusoe had lived like a king on that desert island. So he actually had gotten some pretty nice stuff that he was able to salvage from the ship. I think it would have been stupid if he didn't go back to the ship, because think about what he had gotten from there. But now that's Robinson Crusoe. That's like a story within the story, okay, that he's trying to teach Etienne. But Etienne just thought it was silly that he would need to go back and get anything. Couldn't he make do with what he had? That's what he thought. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 8. So the boys are working together. Are they happy about it? No, Neither of them are happy. They don't really seem to be friendly with one another. Etienne has a shield up or something on it. He really does not want any part of this. I think Matt would be more willing to be friendly if he could get a little warmth from Etienne, but Etienne's not doing it. He's dead set not to be there. But why is he there? Why does Etienne keep coming back if he doesn't like it so much? Why do you think? Remember his grandfather, Sockness? Sockness is the one that saved Matt when he was having so much trouble and took care of him. And remember, Matt wants to repay him, and Sockness and Matt made this agreement. So Sockness is Etienne's grandfather and is telling Etienne, you go and you learn. Native Americans very respectful. If that's what his grandfather is telling him to do, then that's what he's going to do, whether he's happy about it or not. So thinking, just making predictions about chapter 9, I'm trying, like when I'm reading this, I'm watching them in my mind, sitting down at the table, trying to read Robinson Crusoe together in that tiny little cabin, just trying to picture what that would have been like. Remember I said the size, I think I'd originally said maybe half the size of this classroom. I don't even know if it was that big, maybe 1/4 the size of the classroom, but very small, probably about the size of your bedroom. It was what that family was going to live in. But that's where they're sitting trying to learn to read. So chapter 9, I mean, will they just keep continuing on practicing reading Robinson Crusoe? Do you think there might be some adventures coming? Who knows? We will read. So we read 7 and 8 today. The next time we meet up, we'll be reading chapters 9 and 10. Okay, so 2 chapters. This week was a little bit shorter because we had Easter Monday and our quiet day on Wednesday. So we've only had Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. So we've kind of doubled up on the chapters a little bit. So just, think about what's happening. Your chapter summary. I've got mine written up here, chapters 7 and 8. And I wrote, Matt tries to teach Etienne how to read. He uses the book Robinson Crusoe. The boys do not like this arrangement. They don't like the whole having to be together to learn to read. They are not having fun. But we're going to see what happens. It gets good. Hang in there. Okay, so when we get together, just be thinking chapter 9 and 10. And remember, like I said, if you want to read ahead, you can. That might even be great practice for you to read ahead. But I still want you to come back with me when you're supposed to on the days to read along with me in the book, okay? Because that just makes it kind of fun. And I wish we could discuss in person, but we can't. So it's okay. This is good enough, okay? All right, be good. Have a great day, guys. I'll see you. I won't see you, sorry. I'll see you sometime.